Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Trekyards. I am Captain Foley.
I'm Connor Coggins, and special guest.
Lieutenant Commander Waltke, live long and prosper.
Tell us who you are, Aaron, in case people don't know.
I recognize the name. I know you've met, but I recognize the name from online.
Yes, so I am currently the head writer and co-executive producer of Star Trek Prodigy.
And this is a special bonus interview because this is about the Borg exclusively that just came out. So thank you very much for your time. I hope the fans appreciate the openness of this team. So obviously you got this Borg are in. We have this interesting framework. It's only a 24-minute show it's really a character show, not about the Borg, even though that's the A plot, as it were. How much impetus was there in the writers' room to actually explore what happened? The other current shows, and even Lower Decks, which literally just showed us four guys in just regenerate, like that's it, that's the joke. No establishment of where they are. How much were you thinking we should maybe explain versus let's be as vague as possible and then give the baton to the next guy, a la Picard, a la Lower Decks? Where was that line? Because you could do anything.
The tricky thing, especially for a 22-minute show that's ostensibly aimed at like new and young audiences, is you basically get like one exposition chip per episode that you can turn in. And so, we tried our best to at least table set as much as we could in that little monologue that Janeway says before then continuing with it. Because, if we had like a 44-minute episode, I would have had 3 scenes just sort of really laying it all out. But, with these episodes being as packed as they are, and it's truly an ensemble cast, and trying to tell narrative stories with emotional depth and track season arcs and track characters, we have to be very efficient and methodical with how we plant that stuff. So, our approach on Prodigy typically has been, at least planting seeds or specific phrases that will give long-term Trek fans hopefully at least an understanding of where we are, in the sort of the lore and the canon, which is why we specifically name check future Janeway's neurolytic pathogen in that episode, just to be like, oh, I get it. This is the connective tissue that connects end game to Picard. As for like leaving a little bit of window for debate, I got to give you guys something to do, right?
Would you say this episode was especially hard with we can't give exposition versus other episodes?
Yes-ish. I think because we were also in this episode trying to, again, introduce not all the rules, but as many of the basic, this is what the Borg are, this is how they operate. And so we kind of had to like really... we had to pick our battles in that way, because like what are the if somebody came away from this episode, what are some of the baseline things we need to establish? Like whether you like the rule or not, it's the classic rule of like if you're not a threat, they'll ignore you. They will try to assimilate you, but there's ways to avoid that. And
with friendship.
Well,
yes.
I do want to mention that, though, because, I get the humor of saying it's an emotional thing. But, that's also canon. Even Best of Both Worlds, one of the greatest episodes of Borg episodes ever made, Picard basically does that. He just through sheer force of will, he communicates with Data how to shut them down. And he's a corporeal being, and he'd been assimilated for days or weeks or however long it was. But he was still able to break through and resist the collective with an active link. But whereas Zero, they're a non-corporeal being, and it was more of a telepathic sort of overwhelming sort of element, so, similar to what we've seen in some Voyager episodes like Unity, where Chakotay wasn't assimilated, but he had a mental connection to this sort of mini collective that was overwhelming and actually started to sort of subsume him. So that's sort of what was happening with Zero.
I'm glad you explained that, because that was my next question about assimilating a non-corporeal being.
Yeah,
so,
well, we talked at length about that, and
okay, good.
And that's something that maybe you've been the same way. Like, what are the limits of the Borg's ability to assimilate? But the two things we know about the Borg is they try to assimilate and they adapt, right? I would say that given a long enough time, the Borg would probably eventually find a way to even assimilate species 8472. They just because they're rebuffed initially doesn't mean that they won't find some way to make it happen. And so we had a very long spirited debate.
Can they assimilate the Q? Is that brought up?
So that's
dangerous.
The question, right? It's like, why were the Q? But the question behind that question is, why were the Q so weirded out by the Borg, right? Like there's that.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah,
it was a Q. I can't remember which Q episode it was. Q2, where the Q straight up says, "Don't." There's one rule in the continuum: do not provoke the Borg.
In fairness, that might be 29th century Borg, because they're non-corporeal temporal. It could be the Borg from any era. So there's a slight caveat there. Any Borg, anytime, whatever.
But I think what they're reacting to is the potential, right? And I think that's also, and this is my personal headcanon, I think that's why the Q are weirded out by, are a little sort of concerned by Elorians and humans. Is like they see that given enough time, they may eventually become a formidable sort of, if not foe, at least something close to an equal to the Q. Because I don't know if it's ever outright stated, but it's implied the Q may have once been just humanoids in some planar dimension that evolved and became these sort of god beings.
And I actually want to give you credit. When I saw the zero assimilation, it's a little bit quirky because just structurally it kind of has to be. But I liked the fact that it's entirely just moved over as a concept, because they are that broad. I've said to Stuart often, there's trillions, hundreds of trillions of drones all working within billions of ships, within thousands of sectors, and it's so broad that, of course, I like the fact they know what the race is, because they say it in the episode, and they've got a plan. It might take a few minutes, hours, days, whatever, but they have a plan and it works. I kind of like it's just, yes, they might be able to fight it. Every assimilation needs more time to work. That's kind of part of the... But I like to just entirely just moved over it. It's not illogical, but it gives them a precipice of, ooh, interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's a little hint that I saw some Trek fans had picked up on, and I'm sure you did too, is that Medusans are specifically, I think, 806 or something like that. It's a species that
802.
802, yeah. Thank you. So there's species 802, which implies they're an ancient race, right? And
Delta Quadrant as well.
Yeah, that or the Borg. Well, who knows?
You need to be. That was pre-transwarp, you'd assume. So.
Yeah, although the Borg were, technically in the Alpha Quadrant in the 20th century, but we don't talk about that. 22nd century, but you know what I mean. And the 20th century, actually, come to think of it, a lot of centuries they were all around.
But also, non-corporeal beings can just travel anywhere, do anything, and if they're millions of years old, one could be in the Delta Quadrant.
Yeah, exactly. Like but I think, and we've sort of seen that with other non-corporeal races as well in Star Trek, of like the Organians, for instance. They say, oh yeah, we've been around millions of years and transcended our mortal forms. So that was just a fun little tidbit we added. That was like, oh, how interesting that they maybe been around a long time, encountered a less destructive version of the Borg, but even then they struggled to assimilate them way back when.
Speaking of, although they should have a counter, but some people online were saying, is this the same cube as in Picard? Because it's obviously near enough to our space. So you could have made, if that was an intentional mini retcon, that maybe Zero's insanity generating vibe, because the cube didn't assimilate him properly, that created an instability in the cube, which actually allowed for the Romulan. It wasn't really a Jat Vash nonsense of Picard Season 1. That's nonsense. It was Zero's crazy power, which would be a much funner way of doing it.
We left that specific element like open-ended, but I will say that that we did want to imply that maybe some of these dormant cubes were awoken and in a somewhat hobbled state and left them sort of limping along. In my mind, there is a world where one of these hobbled cubes, sort of still on its heels from the pathogen, and now Zero's Medusan vibes, kind of limped along, tried to, without a queen, just trying to revert back to all right, well, we have to rebuild the collective. They assimilate the wrong Romulan ship, and then that's their final nail in the coffin, so to speak. That's part of the fun, right? Is like connecting those little dots. But we definitely
retcon Picard. It's such a power.
Yeah,
gentle implied retcon, but you could, yeah.
I just want to say I appreciate that you guys actually sit down in the writers' room and discuss these things in that detail, because that means a lot to us, because that's what we do. And we just like to think that there's people behind it that are kind of going, whoa, wait a minute, what if?
It's my favorite thing to do in the world.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here.
It's always fun to chat with you. So thank you for joining us for another Trekyards. I'm sure you'll be back. I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about during the course.
We have past Aaron that will come out after this because we did other interviews.
That's true. We talked a little bit over the summer. And then there was also my episode's coming up next week. So get excited.
Ooh, double T's.
Yes.
That's amazing.
All the World's a Stage, written by yours truly. So I'm sure you'll have plenty to talk about with that one as well.
All right. So thank you so much for joining us. And thank you everybody for watching. So until next time, this is Trekyards. I'm Captain Foley.
I'm Connor Cockins and guest.
Lieutenant Commander Waltke, peace and long life.
Thanks, guys. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.